He made a quick stop to collect a gambling debt. He left with the Duke's alien wife. The Valerian spaceport hummed with the usual cacophony of traders, smugglers, and the occasional legitimate businessman. Chris O'Connell leaned against his ship, the Maverick's Fortune, a modified Terran Corsair-class vessel that had seen better days but still outran most Imperial patrols. His weathered leather jacket hung open, revealing a fitted gray shirt that did little to hide his muscular frame. A body built not in gymnasiums, but in firefights and narrow escapes. "Last call for departure to the Cygnus sector," blared the announcement system as Chris checked his chronometer. "Not today," he muttered, running a hand through his tousled light brown hair. His sharp blue eyes scanned the bustling docking bay. He wasn't here for a cargo run, or even one of his more questionable smuggling operations. Today was about collecting what was owed to him. Duke Ranther of the Elysian Dominion had lost spectacularly during their last stellar hazard game. The alien aristocrat had been 3 bottles deep in Arcturian brandy and betting recklessly. By the end of the night, he'd signed over a debt note worth enough credits to keep Chris comfortable for at least a standard year. The Duke's estate loomed on the horizon as Chris's rented skimmer approached, a gleaming monument to excess that seemed to capture and amplify the light of the system's distant sun. Guards with ceremonial but very functional plasma lances stood at attention as he approached the main entrance. "State your business," demanded the taller of the two, his scaled skin shimmering with an iridescent quality unique to the Elysian species. "Chris O'Connell, here to see Duke Ranther about a private matter." He flashed the debt note, its official seal unmistakable even to the guards. Their posture shifted subtly. "The Duke is expecting you," the guard said, his tone now tinged with what might have been pity. The grand hall of the estate was exactly what Chris expected from an alien who could lose a small fortune without blinking. Towering metallic arches that seemed to defy gravity, holographic art pieces that shifted and transformed as he walked past, and furnishings that probably cost more than his ship. Duke Ranther stood at the far end, his tall, slender frame draped in formal attire that marked his status. His silver hair was pulled back tightly, accentuating the sharp angles of his face and the stern, commanding gaze that had intimidated countless beings across 3-star systems. "Ah, the human arrives to collect," Ranther said, his voice carrying an artificial warmth that didn't reach his eyes. "Punctual as your kind tends to be when credits are involved." Chris shrugged. "A debt's a debt, Your Grace. Nothing personal." "Indeed." The Duke gestured to a servant who approached with a data pad. "I've prepared the transfer authorization. However, I find myself in a predicament regarding liquid assets." Chris's jaw tightened. He'd heard this song before. "We had an agreement." "And I intend to honor it," Ranther replied, a bitter smile forming on his thin lips. "Though perhaps not in the manner you expected." He made a subtle gesture toward a side entrance. The door slid open, and Chris's prepared retort died in his throat. Standing there was perhaps the most striking humanoid alien woman he'd ever encountered. Her midnight blue skin seemed to absorb the light around her, creating an almost ethereal glow. Large eyes the color of star sapphire regarded him with a mixture of resignation and defiance. She wore a stunning gown of soft, silvery gray fabric that clung elegantly to her slender figure, exposing delicate arms adorned with fine jewelry. "My wife, Duchess Lyriana," the Duke announced, his voice now tinged with unmistakable malice. "She will serve as payment for my debt." Chris stared in disbelief, his gaze shifting between the Duke and the Duchess. Her long silvery hair, divided into several intricate strands, cascaded over her shoulders, emphasizing an otherworldly grace that seemed at odds with the tension in the room. "This is a joke," Chris finally managed. "I assure you it is not," Ranther replied coldly. "The Duchess is worth considerably more than what I owe you." "Considerate interest." The Duchess remained silent, but her eyes never left Chris's face. There was something in her gaze, not fear, but calculation. "People aren't currency," Chris said, his voice hardening, "even in the outer systems." The Duke laughed, a hollow sound devoid of humor. "How charmingly human of you to suddenly develop principles." "You're a smuggler, O'Connell. Your reputation precedes you. And in case you've forgotten, on Elysia, Marriages are political contracts. This one has simply been renegotiated. Chris's hand instinctively moved toward the blaster concealed beneath his jacket. I came for credits, not complications. And yet complications find us all, the Duke replied smoothly. The Duchess or nothing. Those are your options. The Duchess finally spoke, her voice melodic yet firm. I have already packed my essentials. I am prepared to depart immediately. Her accent gave the standard galactic common and almost musical quality. Chris looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something beyond the regal bearing and exquisite features, a determination that mirrored his own when backed into a corner. This isn't right, he said, more to himself than anyone else. Few things are in this galaxy, she replied quietly, but sometimes wrong choices lead to right places. The Duke's patience visibly thinned. Decide, human. Take my wife and clear the debt, or leave with nothing. My generosity has limits. Chris knew a trap when he saw one. This wasn't about a gambling debt, it was something else entirely. But as he looked at the Duchess again, he realized two things. She wanted to leave, and whatever game the Duke was playing, it might be worth discovering. Fine, he said finally. Deal. The Duke's smile was all predator. Excellent. The necessary documentation has been prepared. Once signed, the Duchess is your responsibility, as is any trouble that follows her. As Chris reluctantly pressed his thumb to the datapad, sealing the bizarre transaction, he couldn't shake the feeling that he just gambled far more than he'd intended to collect. An hour later, they boarded the Maverick's Fortune in silence. The Duchess brought only 2 modest cases, surprising for someone of her station. As the ship's engines roared to life, Chris glanced at his unexpected passenger. I hope you know what you're doing, he said, because I sure as hell don't. For the first time, a ghost of a smile touched her lips. And that makes 2 of us, Captain O'Connell. As the ship broke atmosphere, leaving Alicia behind, Chris couldn't decide if he just made the worst mistake of his life or stumbled into something far more interesting than a simple debt collection. The Maverick's Fortune slipped into the darkness of space, leaving Alicia's azure glow behind. Chris engaged the autopilot and leaned back in the pilot's chair, his mind racing with questions. The Duchess sat in the co-pilot seat, her posture perfect despite the obvious tension in her shoulders. She'd remained silent since boarding, her sapphire eyes fixed on the viewport as stars streaked past. Chris cleared his throat. So, do Elysian royalty typically get traded like cargo, or am I just special? The Duchess turned to him, the ghost of a smile playing at the corners of her lips. There is nothing typical about this situation, Captain O'Connell. Chris, he corrected, if we're going to be shipmates, might as well drop the formalities. Liriana then, she replied, her musical accent making even her name sound like poetry. And to answer your question, no, this is highly unusual, even by Elysian standards. Chris was about to respond when the ship's proximity alarm blared. He spun toward the console, fingers flying across the controls. The rear scanners showed multiple vessels launching from Alicia's surface, their trajectories clearly aimed at the Maverick's Fortune. Friends of yore? He asked, already plotting evasive maneuvers. Liriana's expression darkened. We need to change course immediately. Yeah, I gathered that much. Chris's hands moved with practiced efficiency, rerouting power to the engines. Care to tell me why your husband's sending an entire squadron after us? Ex-husband, she corrected, and they're not his ships. They belong to the Syndicate. Chris's blood ran cold. The Syndicate, a criminal organization that made even the most hardened smugglers nervous. What the hell have you gotten me into? Liriana leaned forward, her face suddenly inches from his. I was deliberately offered as part of a scheme. Ranthor owed the Syndicate far more than he owed you. By paying his debt to you with me, he created a perfect scenario. Either you refuse and he keeps his leverage against the Syndicate, or you accept and they eliminate both of us, solving his problem entirely. Son of a... Chris punched the hyperdrive, sending the ship lurching into faster-than-light travel. The pursuing vessels disappeared from the scanners, at least temporarily. So I'm just collateral damage in some aristocratic power play? I tried to warn you with my eyes, Liriana said, her voice softer now. There wasn't an opportunity to speak freely in the estate. Ranthor has listening devices everywhere. Chris ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit from childhood. Great. Just great. So now I've got the syndicate on my tail, and for what? A debt that wasn't even real? The debt was real, Liriana assured him, but I'm worth far more to the syndicate than credits. I possess information that could dismantle their operations in 3 systems. For the first time, Chris really looked at her, not as an exquisite alien beauty or unexpected complication, but as someone who might be as trapped as he was. Something in her eyes spoke of intelligence and determination that went beyond her regal bearing. "You're not just a duchess, are you?" he asked, suspicion and curiosity mingling in his voice. Liriana hesitated, then reached up to touch the multi-layered necklace at her throat. With a subtle movement, she removed what appeared to be a decorative gem, revealing it to be a data crystal. "I've been gathering evidence against the syndicate for years. Ranthor discovered my activities recently. He saw an opportunity to save himself by sacrificing both of us." Chris whistled low. "Spy work? That's a dangerous game for royalty." "My title was merely convenient cover," she explained, replacing the crystal. "The Elysian Intelligence Service recruited me long before my marriage. Ranthor never knew until now." The ship hummed around them as Chris processed this information. He should be furious, should be plotting the fastest way to dump her at the nearest spaceport and disappear. Instead, he found himself admiring her courage. "So what's the plan?" he asked finally. "Because I'm guessing Run Like Hell isn't going to cut it with the syndicate." "We need to reach the Terran embassy on Proxima Station," Liriana said. "My handler can extract the data and provide protection." Chris laughed without humor. "Proxima Station is 3 jumps away, through syndicate-controlled space. We might as well paint targets on our backs." "I know alternative routes," she countered, leaning closer. The scent of her, something like night-blooming flowers and stardust, momentarily distracted him. "Routes that don't appear on standard charts." Their proximity suddenly registered with both of them. Chris became acutely aware of the way the ship's lights played across her midnight blue skin, how her eyes seemed to contain entire galaxies. Liriana didn't pull away, her gaze dropping briefly to his lips before meeting his eyes again. "Why should I trust you?" Chris asked, his voice rougher than he intended. "Because right now, Captain," she replied, her breath warm against his face. "We're the only allies either of us has." The moment hung between them, electric with possibility. Chris had known many women across the galaxy, but none had affected him quite like this. This mixture of danger and attraction, suspicion and fascination. "If we're going to die anyway," he murmured, "might as well make the journey interesting." Liriana's lips curved into a genuine smile. "A very human perspective. I quite agree with it." The ship's alarm interrupted whatever might have happened next. The hyperdrive was overheating. They couldn't maintain their current speed much longer. "We need to drop out of hyperspace soon," Chris said, reluctantly turning back to the controls. "Got any of those alternative routes handy?" Liriana nodded, her professional demeanor returning, though her eyes still held something warmer. "Set course for the Cerulean Nebula. We can lose them in the radiation fields." As Chris adjusted their trajectory, he couldn't help but wonder if he'd just made the second worst mistake of his life, or possibly the best. The Cerulean Nebula lived up to its name, a vast swirl of blue-tinged gases that engulfed the Maverick's fortune as Chris guided the ship deeper into its protective embrace. Radiation readings climbed steadily, forcing him to divert additional power to the shields. "This should mask our signature," he said, fingers dancing across the controls. "Assuming the radiation doesn't fry us first." Liriana stood behind him, one delicate hand resting on the back of his chair. "The nebula's outer layers are safe enough. It's only the core we need to avoid." "Comforting," Chris muttered, but he trusted her knowledge. Something about her competence was undeniably attractive. This wasn't some helpless aristocrat, but a woman who clearly knew her way around dangerous situations. The ship shuddered as they penetrated deeper into the nebula's billowing clouds. The viewport filled with swirling azure and violet hues, casting an otherworldly glow throughout the cockpit. In this light, Liriana's midnight blue skin seemed to shimmer with its own inner radiance. "Beautiful," Chris said, not entirely referring to the nebula. Liriana caught his meaning, a subtle smile playing at her lips. "Many find the nebula disorienting. Humans seem uniquely capable of appreciating its chaotic beauty." "We're good at finding beauty in dangerous things," he replied, holding her gaze a moment longer than necessary. The moment broke when the proximity alarm sounded again. Chris swore under his breath, checking the readings. 3 ships entering the nebula. Syndicate signatures. "They're persistent," Liriana observed, her expression darkening. "We should be hidden by the radiation." "Should be, but aren't." Chris killed the running lights and switched to minimal power. "They must have tracking technology we don't know about." Liriana's hand moved to her necklace, fingers brushing the concealed data crystal. "Or a beacon. Ranthor may have planted something on me." They exchanged a look of mutual understanding. If she was right, nowhere in the nebula would be safe. "There's an outpost on the far side," she said suddenly. "A Syndicate refueling station. They wouldn't expect us to head directly toward it." Chris raised an eyebrow. "You want us to fly into the lion's den?" "Sometimes the safest place to hide is in plain sight," she countered. "Besides, we need supplies if we're going to reach Proxima Station." It was reckless, borderline suicidal. Exactly the kind of plan Chris would have come up with himself. He grinned despite the danger. "I like the way you think, Duchess." The journey through the nebula was tense, each moment bringing them closer to both safety and potential disaster. The confined space of the cockpit seemed to shrink further, heightening Chris's awareness of Liriana's presence beside him. The faint scent of her skin, the soft sound of her breathing, distractions he couldn't afford yet couldn't ignore. As they approached the outpost, its silhouette barely visible through the nebula's haze, Liriana moved to the ship's small sleeping quarters. "I need to change. This gown screams Elysian royalty." Chris nodded, keeping his eyes on the controls though his mind followed her. Minutes later, she returned wearing a simple jumpsuit she'd found in the ship's storage. Standard spacer attire, practical and nondescript. Somehow, she made even that look elegant. "Better," she said, tucking her distinctive silver hair beneath a cap. "Though I doubt this disguise would fool anyone looking closely." "Then we don't let them look closely," Chris replied, powering down the ship as they approached the outpost docking bay. "We're just another crew making a supply run. In and out." The docking procedure went smoother than expected. The outpost's automated systems guided them into a berth without human or alien intervention. So far, so good. "Stay close," Chris instructed as they prepared to disembark, "and let me do the talking." Liriana nodded, but her eyes held a warning. "Remember, these aren't common thugs. Syndicate operatives are trained killers." "So am I when necessary," Chris replied with a confidence that wasn't entirely bravado. He hadn't survived this long in the smuggling business by being easy to kill. The outpost's interior was dimly lit and sparsely populated. A few maintenance droids, a handful of rough-looking spacers at a makeshift bar, and a bored-looking Vexillian behind a supply counter. The atmosphere reeked of fuel, unwashed bodies, and desperation. Chris approached the counter, Liriana close behind him. "Need to refuel and restock. Basic provisions for 2-3-day journey." The Vexillian's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of suspicion in their species. Identification and credit verification. Chris produced a fake ID chip, one of several he kept for emergencies. The Vexillian inserted it into a scanner, all 4 eyes narrowing as it processed. "Unusual route through the nebula," the alien commented, mandibles clicking. "Most avoid this section." "Most aren't in a hurry," Chris replied casually. "Cargo's time-sensitive." The Vexillian seemed satisfied, returning the ID chip and processing the transaction. As they waited for the supplies to be gathered, Chris noticed a group of uniformed aliens entering the outpost's main area. Their insignias marked them as Syndicate enforcers. "We've got company," he murmured to Liriana. "Don't turn around." She stiffened beside him but maintained her composure. "How many?" "4, armed, looking like they're expecting someone." The lead enforcer, a tall draconid with scaled skin and predatory eyes, surveyed the room. His gaze passed over them once, then returned, lingering. Time to go, Chris said, grabbing their supplies the moment they arrived. Now! They were halfway to the exit when the Draconid's voice rang out. You there? Stop. Chris pushed Liriana ahead of him. Get to the ship. Start the engines. She hesitated only a fraction of a second before complying, moving with surprising speed toward the docking bay. Chris turned to face the approaching enforcers, hand hovering near his concealed blaster. Problem, officer? He asked, feigning confusion. The Draconid's forked tongue flicked out, tasting the air. Your identification, human. Again. Behind the enforcers, Chris spotted a familiar face on a display screen, his own alongside Liriana's, marked as wanted fugitives. The trap had been set before they'd even arrived. In that moment, Chris made a decision that would alter the course of his life. This wasn't just about a debt anymore, or even self-preservation. Something about Liriana, her courage, her intelligence, the way she looked at him like he was more than just a smuggler, had gotten under his skin. Sure thing, he said, reaching slowly into his jacket. Let me just... In one fluid motion, he threw the supply pack at the lead enforcer and drew his blaster, firing not at the aliens, but at the overhead lighting panel. The outpost plunged into darkness, emergency lights casting everything in a red glow as chaos erupted. Chris ran, dodging blaster fire and confused spacers as he sprinted toward the docking bay, toward Liriana, toward a future suddenly worth fighting for. Blaster fire ricocheted off the corridor walls as Chris sprinted toward the docking bay. The emergency lighting bathed everything in crimson, transforming the outpost into a hellscape of shadows and chaos. Behind him, the syndicate enforcers shouted commands, their heavy footfalls echoing through the metal passageway. Chris rounded the final corner and saw the Maverick's fortune ahead, its engines already glowing with pre-launch energy. The loading ramp remained down, Liriana waiting for him despite the danger. The sight sent an unexpected surge of warmth through his chest. A blaster bolt sizzled past his ear, close enough that he felt its heat. Without breaking stride, Chris spun and fired 3 rapid shots behind him, not aiming to kill but to slow his pursuers. The lead Draconid dove for cover, buying Chris precious seconds. Go! He shouted as he bounded up the ramp. Liriana was already in motion, slapping the ramp controls and racing toward the cockpit. Chris followed, throwing himself into the pilot's seat as the ship's systems came online. Hold on to something! He bypassed standard launch protocols, overriding the docking clamps with a surge of power that tore them free with a metallic screech. The Maverick's fortune lurched forward, scraping against the bay doors that were beginning to close. They're sealing us in, Liriana observed, her voice remarkably steady as she strapped into the co-pilot's seat. Not for long. Chris diverted all available power to the forward shields and engines. This is going to be rough. The ship accelerated, smashing through the partially closed doors in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Alarms blared as they burst free into the nebula's swirling blue embrace. Damage report? Liriana asked, already working the defensive systems. Nothing critical. Chris's hands flew across the controls, plotting an erratic course deeper into the nebula. Shield integrity at 70%. We've got company, though. 3 Syndicate patrol ships emerged from the outpost, their sleek black hulls designed for pursuit. They formed a triangular pattern, attempting to box in the Maverick's fortune. I see them, Liriana said, surprising Chris by activating the weapon system with practiced ease. Targeting the lead vessel. You know how to shoot, he asked, executing a tight spiral maneuver that sent them plunging toward a particularly dense cloud of ionized gas. A small smile played across her lips as she locked on to the nearest pursuer. There's a great deal you don't know about me, Captain. She fired, the energy beam cutting through the nebula's haze and striking the lead ship's port engine. It veered off course, trailing plasma. Nice shot, Chris said with genuine admiration. Where did Duchess learn to shoot like that? I wasn't always a Duchess. Liriana fired again, forcing the second ship to break formation. Before Ranthor, before the intelligence service, I was a colonial child on Nero's Prime. Chris risked a glance at her, noting the sudden hardness in her expression. Never heard of it. Few have. It was destroyed by the Syndicate 15 years ago. A mining accident, according to official records. Her voice remained controlled, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped the weapons console. In reality, the colonists discovered the syndicate was using the mining operation as a front for weapons development. My parents were among the first to speak out. Understanding dawned on Chris as he guided the ship through a particularly turbulent section of the nebula. And the syndicate silenced them. They silenced everyone, over 3,000 colonists. Liriana fired again, this time disabling the weapons array on the third pursuer. I survived because I was off-world, visiting relatives. When I returned, there was nothing left. The raw pain in her voice struck Chris deeply. He'd lost people before. This was a dangerous life, but never on that scale, never so completely. So you joined intelligence to take them down, he said, pieces falling into place. I dedicated my life to it. She met his gaze, her sapphire eyes fierce with determination. The marriage to Ranthor was part of my cover. His family had syndicate connections I could exploit. What I didn't know was that he'd discovered my true purpose. Chris executed a series of evasive maneuvers, losing the damaged pursuers in the nebula's dense clouds. For the moment, they were clear. That's why the data you're carrying is so important, he realized. It's not just evidence, it's your revenge. Justice, she corrected, for 3,000 voices that can never speak again. The cockpit fell silent save for the hum of the engines. Chris set the autopilot, plotting a course that would take them through the nebula's outer rim, away from both the outpost and their expected route. When he turned back to Liriana, he found her watching him, something vulnerable in her expression that hadn't been there before. Most people would drop me at the nearest port after hearing that, she said quietly. I've made powerful enemies. I'm not most people. Chris moved closer, drawn to her in a way he couldn't fully explain. And I've never been good at walking away from a fight worth fighting. The ship's interior lights had dimmed to conserve power, casting soft shadows across Liriana's midnight blue features. She reached up, removing the cap that had hidden her silver hair, letting it cascade over her shoulders. Why are you helping me, Chris? Really? Her question hung in the air between them, honest and direct. He could have given many answers about doing the right thing, about hating the syndicate himself, about the promise of reward when they reach Proxima Station. All would have contained elements of truth. Instead, he found himself saying, because from the moment I saw you in that hall, standing there like royalty even when being traded away, something about you got under my skin. And every minute since has only made it worse. A smile, genuine, warm, without pretense, transformed her face. Humans are remarkably direct with their feelings. One of our better quality, he agreed, moving closer still. My people believe that sharing danger creates a bond stronger than blood, she said, her voice softer now. We have certainly shared enough of it today. Their faces were inches apart, the air between them charged with something more powerful than the nebula's energy fields. Chris reached out, brushing a strand of silver hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her skin. Any other Elysian beliefs I should know about? He asked, his voice rough with desire. Many, she whispered, leaning into his touch. But some things transcend cultural differences. When their lips finally met, it felt like jumping to hyperspace, a moment of suspended reality followed by a rush of sensation that defied description. Her skin was cooler than a human's, but warming rapidly beneath his touch. Her scent enveloped him, exotic and intoxicating. The ship drifted deeper into the nebula's protective embrace as they discovered new territories of their own. Cultural differences forgotten in the universal language of desire. Mourning in space was an arbitrary concept, merely a setting on the ship's environmental controls. Chris woke to the soft hum of the Maverick's Fortune's engines and the unfamiliar weight of Liriana's head against his chest. Her silver hair spilled across his skin like liquid moonlight, her breathing deep and even. For a moment, he simply watched her sleep, marveling at how quickly his life had changed. 3 days ago, he'd been a lone smuggler chasing a debt. Now he was harboring an alien intelligence agent, running from the syndicate, and feeling things he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Liriana stirred, her sapphire eyes opening to meet his. You're staring, she murmured, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Hard not to, he replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I'm still trying to figure out if last night was real. She stretched languidly against him, her midnight blue skin contrasting with the ship's white bedding. Very real, though I must say, human mating rituals are surprisingly intense. Chris laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. Is that a complaint? An observation, she corrected, propping herself up on one elbow to look at him properly. Elysians approach physical intimacy with more restraint. Your species embraces passion in a way mine considers almost primitive. Primitive, huh? He raised an eyebrow, amused rather than offended. Primitive in the most magnificent way, she clarified, tracing a finger along his jawline. There's something refreshingly honest about it. No political calculations or social positioning, just pure desire. That's us humans, refreshingly honest. He captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. Though I've got to say, your adaptability was impressive. A faint purple flush colored her cheeks, the Elysian equivalent of a blush. I've always been a quick study. The ship's navigation alert chimed, breaking the moment. Reality rushed back in. They were still fugitives, still hunted, still carrying data that could bring down the Syndicate's operations in 3 systems. Chris sighed, reluctantly disentangling himself from Liriana and reaching for his clothes. We're approaching the nebula's edge. Time to figure out our next move. In the cockpit, the swirling blue gases of the nebula were thinning, revealing the star-speckled blackness of open space beyond. The navigation computers showed their position relative to Proxima Station, still 2 jumps away, with a major Syndicate checkpoint directly in their path. We can't go around it, Liriana said, studying the display. The detour would add days to our journey, and the Syndicate would catch up to us. And we can't go through it without clearance codes, Chris added, running a hand through his tousled hair. Which we definitely don't have. Liriana's expression grew thoughtful. What about your smuggling contacts? Surely you must know people who specialize in getting past Syndicate checkpoints. Chris leaned back in his chair, considering. There's Maddox on Helios Station. He's human, former Terran Navy, now runs a legitimate shipping business. Mostly. He specializes in documentation forgery. Can he be trusted? As much as anyone in this business can be. Chris plotted a course for Helios Station. He owes me for getting his daughter out of a Syndicate labor camp 2 years back. Family loyalty means something to him. Liriana nodded, her tactical mind already working. We'll need more than just forged clearance codes. The Syndicate will have our descriptions by now. Maddox can help with that, too. He's got access to identity modulators, high-end stuff that can alter your biometric signatures temporarily. Chris engaged the engines, guiding the ship out of the nebula. It won't fool a deep scan, but it should get us through the checkpoint. As they accelerated away from the nebula's protective embrace, Liriana grew quiet, her gaze fixed on the stars ahead. Chris recognized the look. She was calculating risks, weighing options, preparing for all contingencies. It was the same expression he'd seen countless times in the mirror before a dangerous run. Second thoughts? He asked softly. She turned to him, surprise evident in her features. About us? About the mission? About trusting a smuggler with the most important data of your career? Her expression softened. No! No second thoughts. She reached across the console, her cool fingers finding his. Last night wasn't just physical attraction, Chris. Our species may approach intimacy differently, but some things transcend biology. I've spent years among humans, enough to recognize when one is exceptional. The compliment warmed him in unexpected ways. I'm just a guy trying to stay alive and maybe do the right thing along the way. That modesty, she said with a small smile, is uniquely human. My people would consider it a weakness, but I find it endearing. Well, don't tell anyone. Bad for my reputation. He squeezed her hand before returning his attention to the controls. Helios Station is 6 hours away. We should use that time to prepare. They spent the journey planning their approach to the Syndicate checkpoint, developing contingencies for every scenario they could imagine. Liriana's intelligence training complemented Chris's smuggler instincts perfectly. And where she thought in terms of protocols and procedures, He saw the gaps and vulnerabilities that only came from years of exploiting them. As they worked, Chris found himself watching her, the precise way she moved, the focus in her eyes, the subtle changes in her expression as she considered each option. Last night had changed things between them, creating a connection that went beyond physical attraction or even their shared mission. "You're staring again," she noted without looking up from the tactical display. "Just appreciating the view," he replied with a grin, and thinking that Duke Ranthor was an even bigger fool than I realized. She glanced up, a question in her eyes. "Trading you away," he clarified. "Even as a scheme, it was short-sighted. You're worth more than any gambling debt." The purple flush returned to her cheeks. By Elysian standards, it was a logical transaction. Marriages are strategic alliances, nothing more. And by human standards, her sapphire eyes met his, something vulnerable flickering in their depths. By human standards, I believe it would be considered a tremendous mistake. Your species values emotional connection in ways mine finds impractical. "Impractical, maybe," Chris said, moving to stand beside her. "But worth it." He leaned down to kiss her, a gentler echo of last night's passion. When they parted, he saw something new in her expression. A softening, a surrender to something her logical Elysian mind might have once dismissed as weakness. "We're approaching Helios Station," the ship's computer announced, breaking the moment. Reality intruded once more. They were still fugitives, still hunted. But now they were something else too. Partners in more ways than one, bound by something neither had anticipated when this journey began. "Ready?" Chris asked, returning to the pilot's seat. Liriana nodded, her professional demeanor sliding back into place, though her eyes still held warmth when they met his. "Ready?" As Helios Station grew larger in the viewport, Chris couldn't help but reflect on the irony. He'd set out to collect a debt and instead found himself in debt to fate, to chance, to whatever cosmic force had placed Liriana in his path. It was a debt he had no intention of repaying anytime soon. Helios Station hung in space like a tarnished silver coin, its once gleaming hull now patchworked with repairs and modifications. Unlike the pristine Imperial stations or the ostentatious Elysian outposts, Helios wore its age and history proudly, a testament to human ingenuity and stubborn persistence. Chris guided the Maverick's fortune into a public docking bay, deliberately choosing one far from the main thoroughfares. "Keep your head down," he advised Liriana as they prepared to disembark. "Helios has eyes everywhere." She had changed into nondescript spacer attire, her silver hair tucked beneath a cap, her distinctive blue skin partially concealed by a high-collared jacket. Even disguised, she carried herself with an unmistakable grace that Chris feared might draw attention. "I've conducted covert operations on 17 different worlds," she reminded him with a hint of amusement. "I do know how to blend in." He grinned, securing his blaster beneath his jacket. "Just making sure. You're not exactly forgettable." "A fact you demonstrated quite thoroughly last night," she replied, her sapphire eyes sparkling with mischief. The memory sent warmth through him. Their night together had been a revelation, not just physically, but in the way it had stripped away pretenses between them. In the darkness of his quarters, cultural differences had melted away, leaving only two beings discovering each other with wonder and growing affection. "Focus, O'Connell," he muttered to himself, checking the ship's security protocols one last time. "We've got work to do." They moved through Helios Station's crowded corridors with practiced casualness, just another couple of spacers on business. The station's interior was a maze of markets, repair shops, and establishments of questionable legality, all humming with the diverse languages and species of the frontier. Maddox's shop was tucked away in a quieter section, its unassuming exterior belying the sophisticated operation within. The sign simply read, "Documentation Services" in 5 different languages. "Something's wrong," Chris said, slowing his pace as they approached. 2 draconids in civilian clothing loitered near the entrance, their predatory posture unmistakable to his experienced eye. Syndicate watchers. Liriana followed his gaze, her expression revealing nothing. "How do you want to handle this?" "Direct approach is out," he murmured, guiding her past the shop without a second glance. "They'll have Maddox under surveillance. Probably his communication channels too." They found a small cafe 3 levels up with a view of the docking bays. Over cups of bitter station coffee, they considered their options. "We need those credentials and identity modulators," Liriana said, her voice low. "Without them, we'll never make it through the checkpoint." Chris nodded, his mind racing through possibilities. "Maddox has a backup workshop, more of a bolt hole really. He showed it to me once, said if he ever wasn't at the shop, I should look for him there. Can you contact him somehow? Let him know we need to meet?" "Too risky. If they're monitoring his comms..." Chris trailed off, then suddenly smiled. "But there's someone else we can contact. His daughter, Ellie." 20 minutes later, they were in a public comm booth in the station's entertainment district. Chris punched in a code, not a direct line to Ellie Maddox, but a message service used by smugglers, one the syndicate hadn't yet cracked. "Delivery for Stardust," he said when prompted for a message. "Package from Maverick. We'll collect at the usual spot, 1900 hours." It was simple code. Stardust was Ellie's handle, Maverick his own, and the usual spot referred to a small bar called the Broken Thruster. "Will she understand?" Liriana asked as they left the booth. "If she's her father's daughter, and I know she is..." Chris checked his chronometer. "We have 4 hours to kill before the meeting. Let's find somewhere to lay low." They found a small hostel catering to transient workers, paying cash for a room with no questions asked. The space was cramped and utilitarian, a far cry from the Duke's opulent estate or even the modest comfort of the Maverick's fortune. Liriana sat on the edge of the narrow bed, removing her cap and letting her silver hair cascade down her shoulders. The simple action sent a jolt of desire through Chris that surprised him with its intensity. "What?" she asked, noticing his expression. "Nothing," he said, then reconsidered. "Actually, no. Not nothing. I was just thinking how strange this all is. A week ago, I was chasing a debt. Now I'm hiding in a cheap room with an alien Duchess spy, running from the syndicate and feeling..." He hesitated, unsure how to articulate the tangle of emotions she evoked in him. "Feeling what?" she prompted, her eyes searching his. "Like maybe getting traded as payment for a gambling debt was the best thing that ever happened to you," he finished with a self-deprecating smile. She laughed, the sound musical and genuine. "From an Elysian perspective, it was a most irregular transaction. From a human one." She rose and moved toward him, her movements fluid and graceful. "Perhaps it was indeed fortunate." When she reached him, she placed a hand against his chest over his heart. "Your species has such rapid heartbeat," she observed. "Even at rest, you burn so brightly, so quickly. It's fascinating." "That's us humans," he said, covering her hand with his own. "Always in a hurry." "Not always," she countered, her free hand sliding up to the nape of his neck. "I've observed you can be quite patient when properly motivated." The kiss that followed was unhurried, a leisurely exploration rather than the urgent passion of the previous night. Chris marveled at how quickly they'd learned each other's responses, how naturally they bridged the biological differences between their species. When they finally parted, Liriana's eyes held a mixture of desire and something deeper, more vulnerable. "Elysians don't typically form attachments during missions," she said softly. "It's considered a dangerous distraction. Is that what this is? A distraction?" He kept his tone light, though her answer suddenly seemed vitally important. "No," she replied without hesitation. "This is unprecedented. For me, at least." The admission warmed him more than he expected. For what it's worth, taking an alien intelligence agent on the run from the syndicate isn't exactly my standard operating procedure either. Their shared laughter dissolved the moment's tension, replacing it with comfortable intimacy. They spent the remaining hours planning their approach to the checkpoint, interspersed with moments of quiet connection that required no words. At 1845, they left the hostel and made their way to the Broken Thruster. The bar was typical of frontier establishments, dimly lit, perpetually hazy with smoke from various legal and semi-legal substances, and populated by beings who preferred not to be remembered. They found a booth in the back corner with a clear view of both entrances. Chris ordered drinks they wouldn't consume. Appearances mattered in places like this. At precisely 1900, a young human woman entered, Ellie Maddox had her father's sharp eyes and practical demeanor, dressed in the nondescript clothing of a station technician. She scanned the room with practiced casualness before spotting Chris and making her way over. "Maverick," she greeted him with a nod, sliding into the booth. "Been a while." "Too long, kid," he replied with genuine affection. "This is my associate Lyra." The shortened name was part of their cover. Ellie gave Liriana an appraising look. "Nice to meet you. Dad's in a bit of a situation. Syndicate's breathing down his neck, watching the shop." "We notice," Chris said. "Is he okay?" "For now, they're looking for someone, and they think Dad might help them." Her gaze sharpened. "Wouldn't happen to be you they're after, would it?" Chris didn't bother denying it. "We need his help, Ellie. It's important." She studied them for a long moment before nodding. "Dad figured as much when he saw the alert. He's at the backup workshop, said to tell you the package is ready, but delivery is complicated." Relief washed through Chris. Maddox had prepared what they needed despite the risk. "How complicated?" "Syndicate's got watchers on all major corridors to that section," Ellie explained. "Dad can't leave without being followed, and you can't exactly stroll in." "We need a diversion," Liriana said, speaking for the first time. "Something to draw the watchers away temporarily." Ellie's lips curved into a smile that reminded Chris forcefully of her father. "Already working on it. There's going to be a pressure regulator malfunction in Section 14 in about 20 minutes. Emergency protocols will pull security from all non-essential areas." "That's our window," Chris realized. "Ellie, you're brilliant." "I know," she replied with a grin. "Dad's expecting you. Don't be late. The regulator will mysteriously repair itself after 15 minutes." As she stood to leave, she paused, her expression turning serious. "Whatever you're involved in, Maverick, be careful. The bounty they've put on your heads is big enough to tempt even old friends." With that sobering warning, she disappeared into the crowd, leaving Chris and Liriana to prepare for what might be their most dangerous gambit yet. The station's emergency klaxons blared exactly on schedule. Automated announcements echoed through the corridors. "Pressure anomaly detected in Section 14. All non-essential personnel evacuate immediately. Security teams report to emergency stations." Chris and Liriana moved with purpose through the suddenly chaotic hallways, following the route Ellie had outlined. As predicted, the Syndicate watchers abandoned their post, drawn away by the artificial crisis. 15 minutes, Chris reminded Liriana as they slipped into a maintenance tunnel. Not a second more. Maddox's hidden workshop was tucked behind a defunct recycling processor, its entrance concealed by years of accumulated station detritus. Chris tapped a specific pattern on what appeared to be a solid wall, and a section slid aside, revealing a narrow passage. Inside, Maddox waited. A barrel-chested human with a shock of white hair and the weathered face of someone who'd seen too much of the galaxy's darker corners. His eyes lit up at the sight of Chris, then narrowed when they fell on Liriana. "You've got the whole damn syndicate on your tail," he said by way of greeting. "Must be Tuesday." "Good to see you too, old man," Chris replied with a grin. "This is Liriana. She's with me." Maddox studied her with the practiced eye of someone who'd forged identities for 1,000 different species. "Elysian nobility. Interesting company you're keeping these days, O'Connell." "It's a long story," Chris said. "One I'll tell you over drinks someday when we're not on a countdown." "Fair enough." Maddox gestured to a workbench where 2 small devices and a set of documentation chips waited. "Identity modulators, top of the line. They'll mask your biometric signatures for about 72 hours before the power cells deplete. The docs will get you through the Syndicate checkpoint at Caraxes Junction. They're coded for a human geological survey team with an Elysian consultant." Liriana picked up one of the modulators, examining it with appreciation. "Impressive work. The molecular reconfiguration matrix is far more sophisticated than standard Imperial models." Maddox raised an eyebrow. "Definitely not standard nobility." "Definitely not," Chris agreed, securing the documents. "What do we owe you?" "Considerate payment for Ellie," the older man said, his expression softening momentarily. "Though if you've got the Syndicate this riled up, I'm guessing whatever you're carrying is worth something. When this is over, remember who helped you. Always do, Chris promised, clasping the forger's hand. Watch your back. Once we're clear, they might come asking questions. Let them ask. I've been dodging those reptiles since before you were smuggling candy bars in primary school. Maddox checked a monitor. 8 minutes left on your window. Better move. They retraced their steps through the maintenance tunnel, the identity modulators already active, subtly altering their biometric signatures. By the time they reached the main corridor, the station's systems were announcing the successful repair of the pressure regulator. Perfect timing, Chris murmured as they boarded a transport to the docking bay. Ellie's as good as her father. Your species has a remarkable talent for improvisation, Liriana observed. Elysians plan for every contingency, but humans, you adapt in the moment. It's quite extraordinary. Just part of our charm, he replied with a wink. Back aboard the Maverick's Fortune, they wasted no time in departure procedures. Within 20 minutes, they were clear of Helios Station and plotting a course for Caraxes Junction, the syndicate checkpoint that stood between them and Proxima Station. The journey would take 14 hours, most of it through monitored space. They took turns at the controls, allowing each other brief periods of rest. During one such quiet moment, as the ship cruised through the darkness on autopilot, Liriana found Chris in the small galley, nursing a cup of synthetic coffee. You should be sleeping, he said, though his eyes conveyed how pleased he was to see her. Sleep patterns are different for Elysians, she replied, settling beside him. We require less continuous rest. Convenient evolutionary advantage. Indeed, though there are disadvantages as well. She traced a finger along the back of his hand. We don't experience emotions with the same intensity as humans. It's considered a strength in my culture. Clarity of thought unhindered by emotional responses. And now, Chris asked, turning his hand to capture hers, now I find myself questioning that assumption. Her sapphire eyes met his, vulnerability and wonder mingling in their depths. These past days with you have been illuminating. He smiled, bringing her hand to his lips. Happy to broaden your horizons, Duchess. The hours passed in a blend of vigilance and quiet intimacy. As they approached Caraxes Junction, they reviewed their cover story one final time, ensuring every detail aligned with their forged documentation. The checkpoint loomed ahead, while a massive structure spanning the junction of 3 major trade routes. Syndicate patrol vessels circled it like predators, scanning every approaching ship. This is it, Chris said, opening a communication channel. Geological Survey Vessel Horizon requesting passage to Proxima Sector. Transmitting credentials now. Liriana sat beside him, outwardly calm, though Chris could sense her tension in the slight stiffness of her posture. They'd come too far to fail now. Horizon, this is Caraxes Control, came the response. The Draconid accent unmistakable. Credentials received. Proceed to Docking Bay 4 for standard inspection. Chris exchanged a glance with Liriana. They'd hoped to avoid a physical inspection, but had prepared for this possibility. Acknowledged control. Proceeding to Bay 4. As they maneuvered toward the designated bay, Liriana checked her appearance one last time. The identity modulator had subtly altered her features, not enough to be obvious, but sufficient to confuse facial recognition systems. Her silver hair now appeared more gray, her blue skin a shade lighter. Remember, Chris murmured as they prepared to disembark, you're Dr. Nara Vell, xenogeologist from the University of New Terra. I'm Captain Gregor Tanner. We're boring, by-the-book survey team members. Understood, Captain Tanner, she replied with just a hint of mischief in her eyes. The inspection began routinely enough. 2 syndicate officers, a Draconid and a Vexillian, checked their credentials against the ship's registry. They asked standard questions about their mission, their destination, the purpose of their survey. Then the Draconid's eyes narrowed. Curious timing for a survey mission. We've had alerts about fugitives in this sector. Really? Chris affected mild interest. What kind of fugitives? A human smuggler and an Elysian woman, the officer replied, watching their reactions closely. Wanted for theft and espionage. Sounds exciting, Chris said with a carefully calibrated chuckle. More exciting than core samples and mineral analysis, anyway. The Draconid seemed almost convinced when the Vexillian suddenly stiffened, all four eyes blinking rapidly. "Sir, the biometric scan is showing anomalies." Chris's hand moved imperceptibly closer to his concealed blaster. Liriana remained perfectly composed, though he could sense her calculating escape routes. "Anomalies?" the Draconid demanded. "Yes, sir. The readings are fluctuating." The Vexillian adjusted the scanner. "It could be interference from the junction's radiation field." The Draconid studied them for what felt like an eternity. "Run a deep scan." This was the moment of truth. Maddox had warned that the modulators couldn't fool a deep scan. They'd merely confuse it temporarily. Liriana stepped forward, her bearing suddenly imperious in a way that reminded Chris forcefully of her ducal status. "Officer, I must protest." Deep scans are prohibited under Section 47 of the Galactic Scientific Corps Protocol, which your syndicate agreed to honor just last year. The radiation could damage our sensitive equipment and compromise months of research. The Draconid blinked, clearly unprepared for such authoritative resistance. "Furthermore," she continued seamlessly, "deep scans have been shown to cause cellular disruption in certain species, including my own. I have documentation of my medical exemption, if you insist on proceeding." She produced an official-looking document from her pocket, another of Maddox's masterpieces. The Draconid hesitated, caught between suspicion and bureaucratic uncertainty. Finally, he waved a dismissive hand. "That won't be necessary, Doctor. Your credentials appear in order." Relief washed through Chris, though he maintained his professional demeanor. "Are we cleared to proceed then?" "Yes," the Draconid said reluctantly, "but be advised, security is heightened throughout this sector. Expect additional checkpoints." "Understood. Thank you, officer." Minutes later, they were back in the cockpit, guiding the Maverick's Fortune away from the checkpoint. Neither spoke until they were safely in hyperspace, bound for Proxima Station. "That," Chris finally said, "was the most impressive bluff I've ever seen." Liriana's composure dissolved into a smile. "Not entirely a bluff. Section 47 does exist, though the Syndicate never actually agreed to it." Chris laughed, the sound born of relief and genuine admiration. "Remind me never to play cards with you." "I believe that's how this adventure began," she reminded him, "with a gambling debt." "Best debt I ever collected," he said, reaching for her hand. 48 hours later, they docked at Proxima Station. Liriana's intelligence contacts were waiting, stern-faced human operatives who whisked them through security to a secure section of the station. The debriefing was exhaustive. Liriana presented the data crystal, its contents more damning than even Chris had imagined. Evidence of syndicate weapons deals, political assassinations, and territorial expansion plans that threatened 3 major systems. When it was over, when the intelligence officials had departed with their precious evidence, Liriana found Chris waiting in an observation lounge overlooking the station's massive central hub. "It's done," she said simply, coming to stand beside him at the viewport. "The Syndicate's operations in this sector will be dismantled within weeks. Ranthor will face charges for his collaboration." "And you?" Chris asked. The question that had been haunting him finally spoken aloud. "What happens to you now?" She turned to face him fully, her sapphire eyes searching his. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether a certain smuggler might be interested in a more permanent arrangement than a gambling debt payment." Chris's heart raced in that distinctly human way she'd commented on before. "What did you have in mind, Duchess?" "A partnership," she said, moving closer. "I've been offered a position with the Terran Intelligence Service, liaison to the frontier sectors. I'd need a ship and someone who knows the less official channels of galactic commerce." "Sounds suspiciously legitimate," he teased, though hope was blooming in his chest. "Only partially," she assured him with a smile. "There would still be plenty of opportunities for your particular brand of creative problem-solving." "And us?" he asked, the question encompassing far more than professional considerations. In answer, she closed the distance between them, her lips finding his in a kiss that contained promises no contract could bind. "It seems," she murmured when they finally parted, "that I've developed a rather inconvenient attachment to you, Captain O'Connell. Most irregular for an Elysian." "Funny how that works," he replied, drawing her closer. All right, I came to collect a debt and ended up owing one instead. To whom? To whatever cosmic force put you in my path. He brushed a strand of silver hair from her face. Though I'm planning to spend a very long time paying it off. Outside the viewport, stars beckoned. Countless worlds, countless adventures waiting. But for now, this moment was enough. A debt collected, a heart claimed, and a future neither could have imagined when their journey began.